Hey guys, it's Ethan from Zimmer Labs, and this video is going to be on this custom PC that I just finished building for Damien. Damien wanted a absolute top-of-the-line, no holds barred, no cost withheld, monster PC with the biggest, baddest, fastest hardware. We started this build using this full-size tower EATX case. It is a Be Quiet Dark Base Pro 900, and it is one of the very few cases on the market that can be set up in an inverted and reverse format. And what that means is, unlike 99% of the other computer cases on the market, this is intended for a room where your computer is on the left-hand side and facing to the right. And the reason why that's important is because you want to be able to see it. And with 99% of the computer cases on the market today, this glass door that you can see here is on the other side, which means that if you want to be able to see the internal components, the computer has to be on the right-hand side of the room, facing left. And for Damien's setup, this computer has to be on the left-hand side of the room, facing right. So we had to find a computer case that flipped, basically a 180-degree flipped installation. And after a bit of research, it turned out that there were 6 or 7 cases that could do that, which was surprising to me, considering that there are literally tens of thousands of cases. There's probably around 7 or 8 of them that could actually do an inverse build, and only 2 of them were of the quality and size and setup that was going to be what we wanted to do and was going to be able to accommodate everything that we wanted to put into it. It came down to this one, which is, like I said, the Be Quiet Dark Base Pro 900 or the Seasonic Synchro 7. And between the 2 of them, this was just the better case. Bit nicer, a bit more options, and a bit more flexible. This case is a monster. And it allowed us to pack in literally absolutely everything that we wanted to do. So I'll take you through it just quickly so you guys can see overall kind of what's going on with it. Front panel is done in black brushed aluminum, and the entire front door swings open to reveal, which is totally fantastic, 2 5¼ bays, which are something you almost never see anymore in computers. You know, you just get whatever the inputs are on the top front. And you know, this guy's got good inputs on the top front. You got your power, your reset, 2 USB 3.0s and 2 USB 3.1 Gen 2s with the Type-C on there. And that's great, but it's not, you know, necessarily enough. If you're going to be a high-end user, you're going to need probably more USBs, and you want a Blu-ray drive, right? So we put a super sweet, ultra-fast 16 times Blu-ray burner in there, and then another 6 USB 3.2 basically header up top. It's got dual quick charge 3.0 inputs, and then 4 generation 3.2 inputs, 1 Type-C, and then 3 Type-A's. But the thing that's great about these is these can handle up to 12 volts, so you can run like soldering irons, you can run all sorts of stuff on these, and it can put out something like 100 watts of power through this, which is just totally unheard of as far as USB goes. And then the other thing that's cool about this front end is that it allows you to mount some of your cooling fans right there in the front behind this dust shield. And if you mount them there, as opposed to inside, you get a lot more room to do a custom loop installation and have really big radiators. So let's run through what's going on inside. To begin with, as you can see, I'm just unscrewing these 2 screws in the front that hold this door closed. This is a custom door that I actually made out of plexiglass and on custom hinges, which is basically just an easy access door. The door that comes with this case is a nice glass door, but it's not easy access. You have to take off 4 or 5 different screws, and then the whole thing just kind of falls off. This guy is better because it's on hinges, so it's when you unscrew the screws, it doesn't just fall off and break. You can swing it open, swing it shut, or you can remove it if you want. And that was something that was kind of important because I didn't want to have Damien have a broken glass door. But as you can see, inside this guy is a ton of room. So we started off the build by using this Gigabyte X570 Aorus Xtreme motherboard, which is the absolute biggest, baddest, best motherboard you can get for an AM4 AMD processor. We tried a couple others in the process of building this. I tried the top of the line Asus formula board, and we tried the top of the line MSI board, which is the God Killer or something like that. And we tried the Aorus Xtreme, and this is by far the better board. It's got a lot more power, a lot more functionality. As you can see, hopefully you guys can see, it is also really just terrific looking. It's all matte black all around. The whole thing has aluminum plating over it, and it's not just plating for looks. All of that aluminum that you see is actually functional heat sinks, which is not only awesome because it means you don't have to buy additional heat sinks, but it's awesome because that means there are no fans built onto that motherboard. So like, for example, the chipset, which is right up here where it says Aorus, that would ordinarily have a small 30-40 millimeter fan, something like that spins at like 5,000 RPMs all the time, is annoying, loud, and whiny. This guy just has a honking huge aluminum heatsink to cool the chipset and no fan required. So that's super nice, and it's just a good example of why this motherboard is as good as it is. For the processor, we went with the top of the line AMD Ryzen 9 5950X, which is a 16 core 32 thread CPU. The only thing better would be one of the higher end Ryzen Threadrippers, but this CPU was $800 as opposed to a comparable Threadripper is going to be starting at $2,500 to $3,000 and upwards. So, at the end of the day, the performance of this Ryzen 9 CPU versus those Threadrippers just didn't make any sense to spend 5, 6, 7 times as much money on that CPU when this was basically just as good. I mean, it's really almost just as good. It's very comparable. And some of the Threadrippers that are for sale these days have like 64 cores and 128 threads, but unless you're running, a data server and a security network on a huge commercial building and all sorts of other stuff, you just don't need 64 cores. 16 cores, 32 threads is a ton already. Beyond that, it's just very, very much a specialized type of setup. So that's what we went for with the processor. We've got it overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz on all cores, and it's running stable like that. As you can see, we've got a custom water cooling loop in there, and that's part of the reason why it's able to run at 4.5 gigahertz on all cores without being unstable. It is a EK reservoir with a D5 water pump inside there, about 150 milliliter reservoir, and then I got a little bits power hexagonal flow indicator, which is key, and I'll explain that in a bit. But That's basically the heart of it. And then the oomph comes from the dual radiators that you see here. These are dual 280 millimeter alpha cool ultra wide radiators. They are 65 millimeters wide, so they're basically twice as fat as the standard water cooling radiator you'll see in almost every other computer case. And the reason why, that is one of the reasons why we chose this case, because very few cases can fit all the stuff in there and also manage to fit big honking radiators. But hopefully you guys can see the radiator literally fits right into this little cutout section to like a 1.5 millimeter gap. It's like going to Machu Picchu and seeing the stones there that fit together without, you know, enough room to stick a card between them. The whole thing is basically looks like it's and seems like it's intended for this exact setup. But the dual radiators can handle cooling just about anything. Opted for the biggest hard tube we could find. So this is 16 millimeter hard PETG tubing, you know, obviously custom bent to accommodate the system. And we went with a, obviously as you can see, an opaque blue colored cooling liquid just for the look of the thing. And I think the look came out great. I think it looks really nice. Cooling that down, we have 5 industrial 3000 RPM Noctua fans. And these things right now are running at maybe 15 to 20% speed, because when they run at max speed it sounds like a helicopter is coming by. And that's because, like I said, these are industrial fans. You know, Noctua fans are pretty much the best fans you can get, but the standard Noctua fan is a 1500 RPM fan, not a 3000 RPM fan. And I just wanted to really go all out on this build to make sure that it could do exactly what Damien wanted it to do. So we ended up doing 5 of those fans. Like I showed you guys earlier, there are 2 in the front, and then there are 2 up here and 1 in the back. And then on the internal ones, I made these custom LED halo rings to mount 2 of the fans, because unfortunately Noctua doesn't sell any, you know, RGB or LED integrated fans. So I wanted really good fans, but I wanted the LEDs in there. So I had to build some custom housings and put NeoPixels into them. And essentially once I did that, I decided I was going to put NeoPixels in everything. So it ended up being just over 550 NeoPixels inside this computer. I replaced all the NeoPixels inside this graphics card water block. I mounted NeoPixels to the back of this guy. I suspended 6 strips of NeoPixels inside this reservoir, which is cool because, as you can see, the reservoir itself is glowing, which it wouldn't be otherwise. And it's subtle, but it's a really cool effect. It makes the reservoir look like it's full of some sort of glowing radioactive liquid, and that's just, you know, I think it just looks great. Then obviously the fans all have 55 or so little tiny itty bitty NeoPixels inside of them. So these guys and these guys, and then there's NeoPixel strip running up the front and running across the top as well. And then the RAM that we ended up using, which is obviously crucial when you're talking about building a really fast computer, we wanted to get, you know, the best RAM you can get, and for my money that's G-Skill RAM. They build the best RAM as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there are other really good RAM companies out there. Corsair makes good stuff. Team I forget the name of the company, but Team something RAM is good also. But G-Skill uses really highly binned Samsung B-Dies controllers. We ended up getting 4 sticks, DDR4, 4000 megahertz, CL15. And CL15 means it's really fast as far as the latency, the time per instruction to send an instruction in and out of the memory across the motherboard from processor to whatever. And that's one of the 2 parts that tells you whether your RAM is fast or not. So you could have 4000 megahertz RAM, but if it's CL19 or CL20 or CL22, it's nowhere near as fast as CL15, because it takes 15 milliseconds for this RAM to send an instruction set there and back, or actually 2 instruction sets because it's double channel RAM, as opposed to 19 or 20 or 22 milliseconds. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, it really is. It's overclocked, but overclocked to exactly what the manufacturer's specs are, which means we could overclock it further. We could probably push this RAM to 4400 megahertz, maybe even 4600 megahertz, something like that. But the voltage would have to be upped, and the latency, the CL rating would have to be loosened up. So the timings would be more like 19 at that speed. And to be honest, once you get past 4000 megahertz with your memory, the returns are diminishing at that point, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to go past 4000. And especially when you're dealing with an AMD processor, because AMD's processors have something called Infinity Fabric inside them, and the Infinity Fabric is rated to 4000 megahertz. So anything beyond that, the memory can try to go beyond that, but it's not going to be able to work correctly with the processor, and it'll probably end up just being unstable. And this is actually the first time I've ever worked with the RGB RAM. I usually just get the best possible RAM I can get for the money, and I don't worry about the LEDs, but considering this case has a really nice custom loop and it's a really pretty setup and the visuals were a large part of the design, I didn't want to skimp out on LEDs, and I wanted to make sure that every possible aspect of this thing was doing as much as it can as far as visual effects go. So as you guys can see, it's really doing a pretty cool thing there. It's called Red Comet, I think. But all the lighting in here can be any color you want, do any effect you want. It can be flashing, circulating, doing a banner, you know, RGBing, rotating colors, whatever you want. This is just kind of my personal favorite setup. But Damien, you can mess around with it and change the colors, change the animation however you like. So the next thing that's ridiculous about this build is the storage. It's got 5 hard drives in it. They're all solid state hard drives. 4 are M.2 NVMe hard drives, and there's 1 small, basically a backup drive, and it is actually built right into the base of this platform here. As you can see, is a Samsung 870 EVO solid state drive. But it's just another one of the little aspects about this case that is just so cool. They design it so the hard drive gets built into the floor here, and it just becomes part of this floor. And obviously the color and the finish matches perfectly, so it's like seamless essentially. Then the other 4 hard drives are mounted on the board. The board can hold 3 M.2 PCI Express 4.0 NVMe version 3 hard drives, so like the really ridiculously fast ones. We've got a Samsung 980 Pro 1 terabyte in the top slot for the operating system and the programs, and then we've got 3 Sabrent PCI Express 4.0 4 terabyte NVMe hard drives in the bottom 2 slots, and then 1 hanging out right there where that green light is on a little PCI Express card. So that's the only way you can fit 4 M.2 drives into this puppy, is using one of the PCI Express lanes. And so what we did there was we took 3 4 terabyte hard drives and ran them in a RAID 0 configuration, so the computer sees all 3 of them as a single 12 terabyte M.2 drive. So, and because it's a RAID 0 NVMe hard drive, it's crazy fast, like ridiculous fast. And then for graphics, despite the fact that it's basically impossible to get a decent graphics card these days anywhere, and certainly not for less than quadruple what you should be paying for it, I was still able to get this GTX 1080 Ti with the EK water block on it, and it's an Asus ROG Strix GTX 1080 Ti, so it's a really nice card. And then obviously, as you can see, it's all tied into the water cooling system. Underneath this shelf here is where the power supply hangs out, and we opted for a 750 watt Corsair HX Platinum power supply, which is an absolute monster. It runs at like 94% efficiency, which is crazy, and it pushes out 750 watts maximum, which is way more than enough to run this graphics card on high, across the board, full settings, and that CPU totally overclocked, memory totally overclocked, and the custom cooling system, and the 110 watt USB header bay up front, and the Blu-ray drive, which is, you know, the whole thing I think runs at like 490 watts when it's running on maximum. So there's a lot of headroom, there's a lot of extra power that can be, you know, cranked out if Damien wants to add anything to the system. As far as what this guy has built-in hardware, it's got an absurdly nice sound system. I think it's 127 decibel signal-to-noise ratio, DAC built-in, digital audio compression, whatever DAC stands for. But it's got incredibly good 7.1 digital surround as well as stereo analog output. It's got 10 gigabyte network speed built in. It's also got your standard gigabyte Ethernet, PCI Express 4.0 instead of 3.0, and that's across the board. It's not just one PCI Express slot, it's all the PCI Express slots are all 4.0, and all the NVMe M.2 slots are all PCI Express 4.0. So they're all running at 64 gigabytes per second, as opposed to PCI Express 3.0 is 32 gigabytes per second. And it's also got built-in Wi-Fi 6 or 6 Plus, whatever the newest Wi-Fi standard is. Up on top of this little area is a wireless charging pad, so you can put your cell phone right there and it will just wirelessly charge. Then we've got a SanDisk SD card reader that I mounted onto the outside of it because Damien asked for that specifically. But this is a UHS 2 reader. Let's show you guys quickly here. Benchmarks. So I just ran these half an hour ago. Crystal Disk Mark is, you know, a speed checker for your hard drives, and average hard drive speed is megabytes per second, 4,300 megabytes per second for transfer. So basically 4.3 gigs per second for reading and 4.35 gigs per second for writing, which is crazy fast. And then the Cinebench score, which I'm really happy with. Cinebench is a benchmarking software. I'm sure most of you guys are aware of that, but it is basically the standard benchmark software you use to do a good solid stress test on your computer. And as you can see, this orange highlighted one is where we scored, and that's out of all the scores that Cinebench gives you as stock scores, that's second place overall, period, at 28,846 or 28,846. That's a really, really high Cinebench score, and it's only behind the Threadripper 2990 by 1,200 points, which is literally almost nothing. So let's quickly do some testing on the speed of the hard drives in the network, just so you guys can see what real world speeds, what it actually means to have a fast 10 gigabit network connection and 12 terabyte M.2 RAID 0 hard drives. I'm going to grab some files off my network. We'll take a single 50 gigabyte movie file, and I'll just copy it over onto the desktop here. Hopefully you guys can see this. Going at 1.1 gig per second transfer speeds. So it's going to take about 30 seconds to transfer a 50 gig movie file from the network onto the storage drive here. Actually, no, it's onto the desktop, so that's onto the C drive. But as you can see, it's a sustained speed. It's not slowing down at all. It's not plateauing. It's just cranking at 1.1 gigs per second, which is just crazy fast. Pretty much as fast as you could possibly hope for. I mean, you could transfer terabytes of information, you know, multiple terabytes of information in less than an hour. Like at that kind of speed, which is something I really wish I would have had back in the day. We'll take this file, take the same one, we will copy it, and let's move it over to the storage drive. And this guy is cranking out a sustained speed of 2.75 gigabytes per second, which means it's going to take about 10 seconds to transfer a 50-something gigabyte file. In 2.78, 2.8, 2.75 gigs per second sustained. Those are crazy fast writing speeds. Blazing fast. Let's delete it because Damien doesn't need that. Let's see, what else did I forget to show you guys. This little tiny Samsung solid state drive there, I did show you guys, but I didn't explain it. So the point of that is essentially it's an extra drive. It's a backup drive. So as you can see, I already installed Windows 10 Pro on here for Damien, and you know, it's activated. I installed a little bit of software, you know, just the basic stuff that he will need if he wants to enjoy the computer, like classic shell, so you don't get this stupid, well, where is it? This stupid thing, the Windows tiles or whatever. You install classic shell, so you get your standard Windows setup here. And then I installed, you know, all the standard stuff like the RAM lighting control, the motherboard lighting control, the Corsair link for the power supply, Cinebench, system information viewer, Fast Boot, which is a program that allows you to boot straight into the BIOS. Which is important because when you restart this computer, it doesn't give you time to get into BIOS. It's that fast. I mean, if you tell it to restart, it's already up and back and running in Windows again in like 22 or 23 seconds on average. And if you hit the delete key as fast as you possibly can, it'll never get into BIOS. It'll never give you the chance to do it. So if you use this program, it'll boot right into BIOS for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Let's see here. I'm going to go into the fan controllers, and just so you guys can see what these fans actually sound like when they're on full speed, I'll turn a couple of them up to full speed. I turned 4 of them up to full speed. Literally, it sounds like this thing's about to take off. It sounds like a really expensive drone, basically. And these fans, legit 3,000 RPMs. They really are running at 3,000 RPMs. Which is totally, like, absurd, but at the same time, it's not absurd if you're pushing your system, you know, gaming or editing or whatever, on a really aggressive overclock, because if you're doing that, then you're going to be building up serious temperature in here, and the control curve on that I have set on the fan configuration thing basically cranks these fans up to 100%, as you can see here, when the temperature of the coolant fluid hits 38 degrees. But generally speaking, when it's at ambient temperatures, between 26 degrees and like 31 or 32 degrees, it's going to be operating at 20% fans. So it's nice and quiet. It's dead. In fact, it's dead quiet. You don't hear anything. But as soon as the water starts to warm up, because you're, you know, pushing your computer and creating a lot of excess heat that gets transferred into the water, those fans crank up to maximum to reduce that heat right out of the water again, which is great. Show you guys how fast this thing boots up. And bear in mind that there's an extra 10 seconds of boot time added on because there's a secondary screen, as you can see right here, where there is a backup and a recovery system installed. That's a custom thing that I added on here, so you tell it I want Windows 10 to run, and then it goes into Windows 10. But you have the other option of putting it to Macrium's basically a recovery operating system, which is a really simplified, dumbed down Windows PE environment, and it allows you to repair your hard drives, repair your operating system installation without having to actually boot up into Windows, which is great, because if your computer crashes and you can't boot into Windows, then you're not going to be able to, install a backup that you may have, and then you're screwed. So, backup software is great, but unless you can actually use it when your computer crashes, it's pointless. So, Macrium Effect is great. It's free software, which is the main reason I use it on everything, because it's a really, full-featured set of software. It does everything you need it to do for free, and, otherwise you'd have to pay for a license for some software to do, what you need it to do as far as backup and recovery goes. But Macrium gives you all the same options for free. So it's something that I always install on every computer that I build for a customer. And then, as I said, that small Samsung solid-state drive that's hanging out right there, that has an image of the operating system loaded onto it. So if this computer were to crash and the main NVMe M.2 hard drive, the 1 terabyte Samsung crashed, you could still boot this computer up from the imaged version of that same operating system that's on the other Samsung hard drive. So basically it doesn't do anything ever until something goes wrong. But if something ever does go wrong, it's for $55, $60. It's fantastic peace of mind, because if something goes majorly wrong with your computer, you can just still boot it up and get it going, in a couple of seconds without having to fix anything, just by switching your boot drive over to that. And then in addition, if that isn't working for whatever reason, like you screwed it up or you changed the image and you used it as a storage drive or whatever, you can still boot into that Macrium Windows PE environment and restore a system image or backup image that you already have saved elsewhere. So there is, in this storage, the 12 terabyte storage hard drive, there is a backup section, and I will put a few standard backups that I have already created on there, so that if something goes wrong, Damien will have some backup images he can just pick and choose from and quickly flash them, clone them, image them onto the Samsung 1 terabyte drive, and then the computer will be up and running again like nothing happened. And that's key when you're building a computer like this, something that's super duper high end, something that's overclocked, something that is really pushing the envelope. It's not a question of will there be a system crash. There will be. It's inevitable. At some point you're going to do something that's going to crash your system. And because it's Windows, it's also inevitable that when that happens, it's probably going to cause some sort of problem to start happening, with your Windows installation. And rather than having to reinstall it and reinstall all your software all over again and go through all the hassle and difficulty of dealing with that, you just create some backups and give yourself a few different options of how to get the backups on there, and just leave them there so that when it happens, you're good to go. And it's only going to be 2 or 3 minutes of your time wasted instead of 2 or 3 days of your time wasted trying to get your computer going again. because it's just, you know, when you're dealing with computers, especially with Windows computers, basically guaranteed that they're going to be glitchy or annoying or weird or crash on you eventually. You know, if it's an Apple, you're never going to have to worry about any of that. It's going to work. So anyone who has an Apple probably doesn't even know what backup software is. But anyone who's got a Windows PC knows why you back things up, why you have restore recovery programs, why you have imaging software, etc., etc. And I think that's actually just about it. So, oh yeah, the only other thing I want to show you guys is open up the LED control software real quick. And we'll do a little bit of messing around with the LEDs. Let's see what these 550 neopixels can actually do. Alright, so it already changed on its own. Jumped into, looks like cyan maybe? But we'll switch it over to one of the first animation programs that it gives us. And you can set it up for whatever color you like. But as you can see inside that reservoir, there's like LED animations going on inside there. It's pretty cool. This is pretty psychedelic. It has a lot of color going on. And this one's funky. This is just an animated rainbow, basically. Reminds me of the rainbow blade on the Profi board. So you guys kind of get the picture. Show you guys one more. This one's basically just doing like a jitter. I think it's actually running really quickly from left to right, but it looks, in effect, it looks like it's just jittering because the pixels are so tiny. But gives you a good idea. This is just a slow pulse with everything set on white. There we go. Here's a color cycle. It's basically going to do a cycle of red, green, and blue in every color in between. Slow it down a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of RGB, but it is pretty cool. I personally like to pick a color and go with it, but if you're all about having lots of color, this is pretty cool. So it cycles through absolutely every possible color. Nice and smooth too. one is called Digital Wave. Oh, I like that actually. It's a wave, it's a rainbow. Turn the brightness down a little bit. That actually looks really cool inside the reservoir. That gives you guys a pretty good idea about the lighting and what's possible as far as the lighting effects go. But that's just the basic stuff that the Gigabyte software allows you to have. All of this stuff is 100% adjustable, tweakable, if you are willing to put in a little bit of time to adjust them. Because as you can see right here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different sections to choose from as far as the lighting goes. And within those 7 sections, in this section right here, there's an additional 10 addressable NeoPixel strips that I added on. So there's 17 individually addressable strips, and each pixel is also obviously individually addressable. And then if you get something like OpenRGB or some software like that that is a bit more advanced than the standard stuff that comes with the motherboard, like OpenRGB allows you to get in there and program it however you like, and you could do some really wild animations with that. Like you could probably do lightsaber animations for all I know. But personally, something simple like this I love. Not too bright, not like blowing you away, but you know, nicely illuminated, everything getting shown off. And that is Damien's new computer. Thank you guys for watching as always, and stay tuned.